Welcome back to Expert Talks, powered by InnoVint, where we bring you real conversations with wine industry experts who are shaping the future of winemaking. I'm your host, Lauren Heindel, and today we're talking about winemakers who wear many hats and are balancing multiple brands and do that using data to find success. So maybe you're a winemaker at one facility and you're kind of thinking of expanding your expertise into new markets, or you're interested in learning what it takes to make data-driven decisions across multiple brands. Well, you're in luck because today we are diving in with Mike Tracy, who is the Director of Winemaking for Trois Noix and Consulting Winemaker for Peter Paul Wines. Mike is a seasoned multi-brand, multi-location winemaker with a rich background working across both estate wineries and custom crush facilities. Michael, thanks for being here.
You're so welcome. It's great to see you. It's been a while.
Yes, always a pleasure. And just as a side note for the audience, Mike and I actually were in the same MBA cohort. So we go back a little far, I would say.
We do. We do. We had a great time doing that. It was awesome.
Yes, we do. We did, I should say. But now we're
Yeah.
here. We're here at Expert Talks, and I am so excited to just ask you a bunch of questions today, learn from you, and really dive into what it takes to manage multiple brands and using data to really expand what you're capable of and how you can empower the people that you work with. So, um, let's start at the beginning. Can you walk us through your path into winemaking and how you really arrived at your current roles?
Definitely. I was born and raised in a little town called Healdsburg, in Sonoma County, specifically in the Dry Creek Valley. So my mom actually worked for EJ Gallo Winery for about 18 years or so, I believe, and raised me on the Fry Ranch. It was just a really wonderful early exposure to viticulture and enology. Fast forward about, I guess, 15 years or so, I got a job at a little cafe called Ravenous in Healdsburg. Some of the listeners might remember this cafe. So that really piqued my interest in going into wine professionally. So I made the decision when it was time to go to college to enroll at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Did a couple of years there in the wine and vit program. Did my first harvest at La Crema winery in Russian River in, I guess, 2009. And then I had a friend at Cornell University in the winemaking program there who encouraged me to look into transferring. I
Yes.
really believe that, winemaking is truly done in the vineyard, at least for the style of wines that we're making. So yeah, spent a couple of years in the vineyards, and then I started embarking on international harvest hopping. I landed my first assistant winemaker role at Checkerboard Vineyards. I worked with Mark McClellan and Bob Levy from Harlan Estate at Checkerboard Vineyards. So I did that for about 3 years, and Martha was a consulting winemaker and still is for Checkerboard, Sloan Estate, and Vineyards 7 and 8, among other clients. So I was really curious about the world of consulting winemaking. So I actually scored a job with Jennifer Williams and Mark Poremski. I dove into this role as assistant and then later associate winemaker with them, and really just hit the ground in custom crush, also a couple of estate wineries, managing operations for all of the different brands. So it was a super different position than at Checkerboard, where I was just really working on one wine. All of a sudden, I was working on 8 wines with two fabulous winemakers. And I worked with Jen and Mark for about 4 years, and then it was time to transition into a head winemaker role, which I found with Jamie Araujo, and that is my current role as director of winemaking at Trois Noix. I got hired as director of winemaking for Trois Noix and also consulting winemaker for a small brand called Peter Paul Wines. And so those are the my two babies, my two projects that I've got going on. And I'm actually starting my first personal wine this harvest in 2025. Yeah, I don't think I
Wait,
told you
this is a
about that
huge
yet.
deal. This is a huge deal. I didn't know about this.
Yeah, it's still very much in the works. I'm probably going to be picking that vineyard in about 2 weeks or so. It's actually Dry Creek Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, so it's going
Full
full
circle.
circle. Yeah, yeah. So that's in the works, and I'm going to be making that over in Russian River. I live in Sonoma County, so
Mhm.
it'll be nice to be close to that winery.
That's awesome. I'm interested to learn from your perspective, how different was it going from an estate vineyard like Checkerboard and then going into managing 8 different wine labels at multiple different facilities? And was there anything that was surprising to you when you made that transition in your career?
Yeah, yeah. There were a lot of surprising things, a lot of changes. I would say first and foremost, it was just the transient nature of being a consulting winemaker versus being at one place every day from, 7 a.m. to 4 or 5 p.m., much later during harvest. So yeah, certainly, becoming um adept at multiple locations, working with multiple crews. Every winery has their own ecosystem and their own culture and processes. And so when you are a winemaker, making wines at multiple facilities, I think that it's very important to be clear about your protocols, about your
Mhm.
expectations for, for the wines that you're making, and all the different facilities, and having all that be very clearly communicated with, leadership at all of the different facilities, with staff. It takes a few years to really kind of develop that trust that I think is extremely important in this work. At an estate winery like Checkerboard, you're working with someone like Martha McClellan, so meticulous, attention to detail, to the next level. And so it's very collaborative. And I would say everyone around you is so hyper focused on making one wine or maybe a second label as well, but just it's a singular focus. Everybody has buy-in on the product. Whereas when you're in a custom crush space, I would say it's a little more, you have to advocate for the brands that you are making at Custom Crush wineries. But it takes some time to just learn my winemaking preferences, because all winemakers are different. And so
Yeah.
pretty much I try to maintain, a really high level of quality. And a lot of the things that we do in winemaking are sort of invisible, whether we're gassing a tank before we move wine into it, or if we're, monitoring dissolved oxygen at bottling. These things can happen just as easily as they might not happen. And so
Yes.
it's ultimately up to me to make sure that we're all on the same page. So yeah, custom crush is just a very different beast. I think very ultra premium wines can be made in both custom crush wineries and estates. I think it just takes a certain amount of vigilance and like hyper organization to do it well on custom crush.
So well said. That brings me to another question. You're juggling multiple brands. Each one is unique, like you just mentioned, and they want their own identity within the bottle. So, what are you doing every day to make sure each style doesn't get transferred to the other style and you are staying true to each of these brands?
That's such a good question. Yeah, and I've got a few answers for sure.
Yes, great.
So, the wine style for Trois Noix, is very fresh. We are, striving for freshness, clean wines. We work with the Muir Hanna Vineyard in Oak Knoll, and also the organic Ryan's Vineyard, also in Oak Knoll, and then a little Pinot Vineyard in Sonoma Valley. But our wine style, we like acid. We're not afraid of it. Our Chardonnay is zippy. It doesn't go through ML. So I would say that, the wine style is really my job I'm actually Jamie Araujo's direct employee. I'm her director of winemaking. So our relationship is very close. So it is me understanding what kind of wines Jamie is passionate about making. We happen to share, a very similar palate. We like wines that, can actually age. We use a lot of neutral oak. We don't use a ton of new French oak. I would say maybe 10% of each of our wines or so. Our macerations are a little bit shorter. Our wines are a little lighter on their feet. Whereas with Peter Paul wines, it's a different style. It's a little bit more classic, a little more opulent. And, the wines are generous in sort of a more hedonistic way. And that brand has been around since about 2006. Trois Noix has been around since really around 2013 or so. It started off kind of more negociant style and then evolved um, to sort of a soup to nuts brand. But yeah, I would say it starts in the vineyard. It's all about our vineyard selection, the site, of course, how we manage the vineyards to the style that we want to be making. And then, of course, picking decisions are everything. Our wines make themselves when the pick is done correctly. And I just believe that it's the relationship that, Jamie Araujo and I have. We're super collaborative. It's also the relationship I have with Peter Paul, who lives in New Hampshire. We work very closely together. Me understanding their visions for the brand, and I apply my same winemaking principles across both of those brands.
Hmm.
We are, I might tweak things differently, how I pick and how I adjust things in the cellar, but we are making high quality wine across the board.
Sounds like it. It sounds like discipline is a big part of what you're doing and keeping your quality and your consistency at the top of mind across all the locations that you're making wine. I do want to quote what you said. It's so perfect. The wines make themselves when the pick is perfect. Or you said it better than that. Everybody says or a good wine starts in the vineyard, but the way that you just presented that is ideal in every way, shape, or form. Cool. Well, I know you mentioned this before. It's the little things like topping, like taking your dissolved oxygen before you bottle, sulfuring. They may seem small, but they really can make or break a wine. Can you share a
Mhm.
story? And you don't have to give details, but can you share a story where maybe one of those small details had a big impact, positively or negatively?
Well, I can certainly think of a few examples, over the years. I think I've probably worked in around 15 to 17 or so different custom crush facilities, some for, multiple years, some for as little as a year. If there are challenges happening, I always strive to work with the custom crush and really exhaust like all options to make sure that we're doing everything we can, to partner with the facility and
Hmm.
make the best wines possible. Sometimes it just, it does come to a point where it may not be a fit if we are, really looking for certain things that aren't happening. So
That's good.
InnoVint, certainly with Trois Noix, we use InnoVint really closely. So I do track, I'm kind of obsessed with, I'm a stickler for monthly sulfuring and topping, not 6 weeks, not
Mm.
7 weeks, like 3 to 4 weeks. Um, the maintenance of wine and aging is something that I think a lot of folks, maybe let go to the wayside sometimes. Not a lot of folks, but some folks. It's just aging. So sometimes it's easy to just, sample every couple months, sulfur on top. I like to check in on the wines every 4 weeks or so, especially in a custom crush environment where you have so many clients under one roof, all these different vineyard sources, different, microbial and yeast populations, different handling of the wines. Of course, a custom crush always tries to have sort of a protocol for sanitation and whatnot for all the wines. But when you're, an alternating proprietorship, like many clients are APs,
Mhm.
I'm able to touch our wines, to work with our wines in a custom crush. So there is more variability in this environment. So I think it's all the more important to be vigilant and to track our wines.
That's great. I'm wondering when it comes to working with clients or brand owners, and you're really the liaison between a lot of these moving parts, how does having transparent data help build trust or empower you to be better at your job?
Hmm. I would say that data is definitely a tool. As businesses and as a winemaker, I refer to data all the time. And there have, been times over the years where, especially with like compliance, related functions. I'm responsible for most of our TTB reporting, Grape Crush report. That's sort of the more boring usage of data. But for me personally, especially during harvest, I am tracking work orders when we have fermentations going off. And I have additions that are, slated to happen at a certain Brix, triggered by this Brix. I need to see that that addition has been made, a nutrient addition or an inoculation. So for Trois Noix, we do a fair amount of native fermentation, and we have some very strict protocols that we, are really proud of actually, that just work, knock on wood, pretty well for our native fermentations. And
Yeah.
so part of that success, is timely nutrient additions and also moving barrels from ambient temperature to cold,
Mm.
in the case of, white fermentation. And so I am definitely looking to see when work orders are executed and then when they're submitted so that I know that work is done. And I will say there have been times, here's a great example of your earlier question. There have been times where there are delays, in a nutrient addition happening or some other action that is critical for the wine. And if I'm on top of it and I see that, or I'm physically at the winery every day during harvest, which I really want to emphasize is very important. Um, as much as I love InnoVint, it is the winemaker's responsibility to be physically present, at least in my opinion, at the winery, touching, smelling, tasting the wines. I use InnoVint and data as a tool. It helps with my picking decisions, all my maturity tracking in the vineyard is logged into InnoVint, where I use the vineyard dashboard. And then definitely all work orders, every single thing that happens to our wines is performed via a work order through InnoVint. So it's all recorded. And so if Jamie and I are curious, what we did with this fermentation back in 2022, we can look back and look at the same day, September 18th, 2022. What were we up to? And it is super useful.
Yeah. Yeah, the vineyard dashboard definitely gives you a bird's eye view into what did you do in this harvest that looks exactly like 2022. Great. What would your piece of advice be for winemakers who are looking to level up and feel like their data either doesn't exist or is in silos? What would you recommend to somebody who is in those shoes?
So yeah, I mean, I sort of akin winemaking data in a way that's kind of similar to like health data. What you don't record can get lost. And so, I'm wearing a Whoop right now, and I'm not sponsored by Whoop, but I'm down to be. But, I'm a CrossFit athlete, and I like to see my data and how I'm, performing on a daily basis. What's my recovery? How much am I sleeping? What's my heart rate variability? Um, you know, these are tools. that I use to stay healthy. And in a similar way with our wines, I'm looking at this data to ensure the health of our wines throughout the aging process. And so, I would say, of course, like I said earlier, being physically present, in the winery is paramount. It really builds that trust, like I said, with the team. You can't smell a fermentation through the computer
Screen.
screen
Yep.
yet. Um, but
Whoa.
I
Don't give us
know,
any
but
ideas, Mike.
I
Don't give us
know.
any
Ooh,
ideas.
I didn't say that. But yeah, I would just say, it's all about being involved. It's like winemakers should want to be at the winery. Winemakers should want to be in the vineyard. That's why we're winemakers. That's why we love what we do. So, InnoVint is absolutely like a very clutch tool, and it makes my life a lot easier, frankly. Like in the custom crush space versus estate, I'm not performing all of the work that's happening on our wines. During harvest, I do quite a bit. Right now, I'm doing actually a lot of physical work on our wines, in a different shirt than this. But yeah, if I'm at home at 8 o'clock, and I want to look at what temperature our Merlot is fermenting at, I can take a look and I can see that real-time data. I can check bricks and temp. I can see all the additions that have taken place. I can write my pump over work orders for the week, and it's very convenient. I think also kind of, for work-life balance,
Mhm.
um, I'm working 80 hours a week right now, but I definitely am catching up on work orders, in the evening, and as opposed to sort of stewing and burning out at the very tail end of the day and in my office, I get to maybe be at a cafe and be working and choose my location for work. And at Trois Noix, we're all about work from home, getting the job done. We are a B corporation, so we're all about, empowering our team to really have ownership over, the work that we do. So, an event really helps kind of enable that autonomy and that sense of sort of responsibility and ownership, which I love. So, thank you guys for that.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a little bit of your life back during harvest, which is honestly irreplaceable. Okay, and last but not least, how do you stay sane during harvest, Mike? What are you doing to keep your head screwed on straight?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I would say, so I think this is a really important topic. And I think, earlier in my career, I'm still learning all the time, of course, but it's like managing stress in harvest is a really big part of performance, for not only myself, but for our wines, and to be, really clear-headed. Exercising for me is a huge part of mental health. Certainly not engaging in as many celebrations or not as much socializing during harvest. I mean, of course, a harvest beer is nice every now and then, but really like emphasizing sleep and being well rested. We're getting up really early to make processing times and often picks as well, which happen in the middle of the night. And so just making sure that I'm showing up with all of my faculties, ready to work with the team, ready to do right by our wines and by our fruit is super important. So usually like in July, I start really getting my bedtime. It's kind of like back to basics. Uh, Trying to get dialed. I don't have kids, so I have a little bit more flexibility than some. But yeah, I just really prioritize self-care in order to provide the care that I think is required for our wines during harvest, for sure.
So well said, and really so simple, but I can definitely relate to you in the early days of my production career where, yeah, you wanted to go get that beer with your friends every Friday night and it starts to take a toll. So I love to hear that you're going back to basics and you really have put the work in.
For
Well,
sure.
thank you so much for being on Expert Talks today. This has been such an insightful look into kind of the art and discipline behind multi-brand winemaking and how to leverage data to really impact good decisions. And I think that a lot of people will walk away with a new appreciation for these little details and the data that protect wine quality in a custom crush facility that you might not necessarily have all the control over. So, again, thank you so much, Mike.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of Expert Talks. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your fellow wine professionals. And until next time, cheers.